I'm going to build the dragon stool from the popular fine woodworking article from a few years ago. The article that I have here is from 2009 by Bob Lang. He calls it the three-clawed dragon stool. It's something I've wanted to build for quite a while. I just never really had the time to do it. As I record this is April of 2020. We're in the middle of the coronavirus shutdown, and it's a good time to do it. So I've got some lumber here. This is a board I got from Jerry McCabe years ago, probably 20 years ago. I've been looking for a project to use it on. This obviously is way more than I need, and this is actually about 40% of the board that I have. It's 8/4 by 24 by probably about 10 feet long. So my plan is to get the seat from over here. This piece is almost quarter sawn. The pith runs right down the middle here. So I've got about a foot on this side I can use, and then I'm going to get the legs and stretchers from over here. So I'll cut about 2 feet off of here, and that'll be more than enough material to make this. So I'm going to go ahead and harvest the parts, cut this up, and we'll get started. All right, I've got my parts all milled up. I've got the seat blank ready to go, so milled to 1.25 inches. It's big enough to get my 11-inch round out of that. I've got 3 parts for the legs. They're milled to 1.5 inches square, and they're about roughly 22 inches long. And then I milled up an extra part for the stretchers. There's should be 3, so I've got 3 fairly straight grain ones and 1 where the grain's a little squirrely. That was bit of an issue for all the parts. That piece of wood that I have, which is myrtle, has a fair amount of knots in it. So I had to work around the knots, and of course anywhere near the knots the grain wasn't real straight. So that's going to add a little bit to the challenge on this. I had some tear out on some of the parts. I'm missing a chunk on this part, but I think I'll be okay. The legs are going to get tapered, so I can cut off some of that stuff. And I'm going to eventually hand plane these surfaces, so I think they'll clean up okay when I'm done. One thing I did do because of that, instead of running particularly these smaller parts through the planer, I just cut them on the table saw to the correct size. I was getting cleaner cuts on the table saw than I was off my planer because of the squirrely grain. So that shouldn't be an issue. Like I said, I'll probably hand plane these. Just take a quick pass on these just to clean them up before I put everything together. But I think we're good to go. Next I'm going to draw some of the diameters on a board so I can use that to help lay things out. And then we'll get started on the stretchers. I've got my SketchUp drawing here. I've got the Bob Lang article. So what I want to do next is lay out basically the circles that define various stations here. The article says that the leg angle is 14.5 degrees, but he says in the article he ended up using 15 degrees because he had a detent on his saw at that angle. So that's the way I modeled this. So these dimensions are slightly different than in the article, and I also have tweaked things a little bit to make sure that this angled tenon stays within the confines of the stretcher dimension. So I've started here by drawing a vertical line. I just used my square, line that up like that, drew a line. So now I want to draw a line perpendicular to that. So I've got a drafting square. So I'm kind of using this as a T-bevel. And I've marked where the center of this piece is. Oh, so much for that. So I need a line that's 60 degrees from here, 30 degrees from here. So I want to really be careful that I'm crossing through my center point here. There we go. And then I need one more coming down that direction. Okay, so these lines are going to be where the legs are going to go. And then from my drawing here, I can get the three circles. So the top is 2 3/4. So, I find this easiest to set the compass if I just draw the line on here. So I'm going to come over 1, 2 3/4. There's one, and then 5 5/8. And then this last one is kind of an oddball, 7 29 32. So I'll switch to 30 seconds here. 29 32 there. There we go. So I'll set my compass. I want to make sure I'm in the middle. Underside of the seat. Okay. Sharpen that up a little bit. And then Okay, so that will help in a little bit with the layout for the stretchers and some of these angles and things. I've laid out my parts in the orientation just to kind of get a sense of how things are going to go here. So I need angled cuts at the ends of each of these pieces. So these cuts are at 60 degrees. So on my chop saw, I made a couple cuts. I've got a 15-degree cut because that's the leg angle. I also want this 30. So these are actually, that's actually 75 and that's 60, but the complement is what I want. So I'm going to use this to set my T-bevel. I could use a drafting triangle too. That would get me the same thing. But this is just because these parts are thicker, this is a little easier to use. And I've got the blades centered on there so I can use either side. So I don't really need to cut that angle yet. I'll worry about that later at the end. Okay, that looks good. So next I'll mark the thickness of the tenons. So I've got my mortise gauge here. I'm going to set the distance between the tips there to match my chisel. And then I need to mark the width here. Now, it doesn't have to be perfectly centered. What matters is that I use the same reference for all of these. So this is the top surface. So I'm going to put a T on all those. And then I'll make sure that I use that. Now I can, if I come in down at the end here and put a couple dimples from both sides. Okay, when I come in from both sides, that looks good. So make sure that's tight. And I want to make sure I'm coming in from the top. Oops, now that's... So my pin... Oh, that pin got really loose. I also need to mark the mortises. So that, like that, like that. And the mortise, per the drawing, is 1.5 inches from the edge of the tenon. So let's see, that's going to go like that. So 1.5 from here is the mortise. So I'll go ahead and lay that out. And I also need to mark the width of that, which is the thickness of this other part. So I think I'm going to need to put this in a vise to hold this. Okay, so I'm at the vise now. While I've got these laid out here, I'm going to mark the 1.5 inch. Okay, so those all look good. I got that, got that, got that, that, and that. So now I need to mark the other, start with this one, the other side of that. The width of this is critical because that's going to be my mortise. So before I do that, I'm going to take a very light pass on each of these to make sure that the the thickness is correct. Okay, I just ran my smoothing plane over these, just these faces, not the top and bottom, but the sides of these. Very thin. That's the kind of shavings I was getting. I checked the thickness of these with calipers. They're all within a few thousandths of each other, so I'm in good shape here. I still have my marks on here. Those didn't go away. So now I need to mark the thickness of this part on here. So I'm going to set that in there at that height. Set that over there. And in order to make sure this is in the right spot, I'm going to put my knife back in that very shallow line there. I'm sliding my T-bevel back up to that. Now I'm going to set my part against there and mark like that. There we go. Got a little mark there. Okay, that's going to work well. So I'm going to do that for each of these parts. Okay, so now I'm going to mark the other side of the mortise. Okay, and just to make sure when I start to cut these, I go in the right direction. I just want a little reminder. All right, so I'm removing. Okay, and then lastly, I will mark with the mortise gauge, once again from the top.